Well, this Good Friday, I want you to come with me to the foot of the cross, where our eyes are taken not to one, but to three dying men, each nailed to a wooden cross. Three men, two of them thoroughly guilty, and one of them completely innocent. Three men, two of them going to paradise, and one of them heading for hell. In the midst of the shocking events of the crucifixion, our focus is taken to a conversation. It's a conversation more shocking than the appearance of these three beaten, bleeding, dying men. And it's a conversation that turns the world upside down. It's a conversation that confronts us with the stark reality of who we really are and who God is. As we stand at the foot of the cross, listening to what is said, we see our sheer guilt and God's shocking grace. Right from the moment of Jesus' arrest, our sheer guilt is on display for all to see. It begins with the injustice of arresting and sentencing an innocent man to death. Yet, of course, Jesus is no mere man. We see God on earth being treated as less than nothing by the ones he created out of nothing. Jesus, who lovingly befriended the friendless, is disowned by one of his own disciples. He is mocked and beaten by those guarding him, lied about and sentenced to death by those appointed to administer justice. Yes, we hear the women mourning and wailing for Jesus, but even in their mourning, our sheer guilt is revealed, as Jesus urges them to weep for themselves because of the judgment that is ahead. We see the people treating the King of the universe in the same way as they treat two bloodthirsty bandits. Scavengers sharing out his last possessions. The people, the rulers even, sneering at God on the cross, shouting out, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, the chosen one." And this spans the nations. The soldiers also came up to mock Jesus. "If you are the King of the Jews, save yourself." And they nailed a sarcastic sign above him. "This is the King of the Jews." And as we get closer to the cross and overhear this conversation, we discover that nothing is different there. The humiliating treatment that these criminals are sharing seems to do nothing to dampen their vitriolic treatment of Jesus. They were both hurling insults at Jesus. And as we begin to listen, we hear one of the criminals continue. "He won't let up. Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us," he gasps. And as we hear these sneers and taunts, do we not hear ourselves too? Aren't our consciences struck with our sheer guilt? You see, this is how we've been treating God right from the start. As we hear the thief continue in his defiance, we see sin for what it is. Sin's not a slip just now and again. It is a posture of defiance against God. The thief, like the rest of these people here, would have heard about Jesus' teaching, his miracles, the lives he transformed. The thief would have been aware of testimony after testimony that Jesus was no ordinary man, but God on earth. Yet as we do every day, this man does on his last day. He not only ignores God, but he despises him. And with just a moment's honest reflection, we know this is how we too naturally treat God. It's a dark picture. At the cross we see our sheer guilt and the judgment that is ahead. But the conversation continues. The other criminal turns and rebukes this man with incredible honesty and insight. "Don't you fear God?" he said. since you are under the same judgment sentence. We are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. The second criminal recognizes that although all three of them are facing the same death, all three of them are not the same. To the naked eye, perhaps, all three do look the same, but to this man it is clear. Two of them are guilty, and one of them is innocent. He says, we are punished justly, for we are getting what our deeds deserve, but this man has done nothing wrong. The second criminal recognizes his sheer guilt. He's under no illusions as he hangs there on the cross. He's given up the defiance of a rebel and he has faced the truth. He deserves what he's getting. He knows that he is guilty, yet as he looks at this man hanging in the centre, he sees something different. He starts to see things from God's perspective. Don't you fear God? He asks. This man has done nothing wrong. He knows there is an injustice taking place. Jesus is different. Instead of showing the hatred and spite which is so clearly on display that day, Jesus cried out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." And in the face of our sheer guilt, we begin to see God's shocking grace. The one who healed the sick hangs beaten and ragged. The one who made the lame walk is now paralyzed himself, his feet nailed to a tree. And yet for those who did it, he cries out, "Father, forgive." And as the criminal displays the heart of the Christian gospel, the acknowledgement that I am wrong but Jesus is right, that I have failed and Jesus has not, that I deserve to be punished and Jesus deserves to be set free, that thief turns to the innocent, broken figure and says, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And it's here that we see God's shocking grace. For Jesus utters the words that we would never expect to hear, words of pardon, words of grace, words of hope. I tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, how could Jesus make such a promise to this hardened criminal paying the price for his crimes? A man who has only just stopped hurling insults at the one who made him. How can Jesus make this promise to any of us, given our sheer guilt before God? Well, Jesus can say these words because of what is taking place on the cross, because of what is hidden from human eyes. As the thief himself has acknowledged, Jesus is innocent while he is guilty. Yet it is here that a miraculous exchange takes place. Imagine, if you can, the sins of the thief beginning to lift. And they start to be transferred onto Jesus. First, small flecks of sin, then huge jet black flakes clinging to him, covering Jesus in layers of moral filth. Every evil thought, every vile act, every cutting remark, every action that revolts God moves from this man to cover his son. And at that same time, the moral purity of Jesus, like a dazzling cloak, lifts and covers the dying thief. The moral radiance of Jesus wraps around that thief's soul. And so as God the Father looks down from heaven, he sees his Son covered with the sins of the world, and his wrath is poured out on him. But at that same time, God looks down on the thief and he sees the moral purity of his son, and the thief becomes a son to him. And what happened to that thief is what happens to all who, like him, face reality and put their trust not in themselves, but in Jesus. The Apostle Paul puts it like this: God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might be put right with God. Can you imagine the sight in heaven that Good Friday? The first person who entered into the glorious presence of God was not a rabbi, not a pastor, not a charity worker, but a wicked, self-centered, greedy thief. Of course, that is what he was. But he's not like that any longer. His mouth is now full of praise, not scorn, because of Jesus. His heart is now full of love, not greed. And his life is full of service, not self. All because of Jesus. In the face of our sheer guilt, God offers us his shocking grace. In the midst of this injustice and cruel rejection, Jesus cries out, "Father, forgive," and offers a place in paradise for all of those who would turn to him. Jesus takes God's wrath in our place. Darkness comes over the earth, and the curtain in the temple is torn in two as Jesus opens the way into a relationship with God. God's love is not for a people who love him first. It's for the type of people we see here. Paradise is not for those who think that they can earn it. It is for those who, like the thief, recognize their guilt and Jesus' innocence. As we look at the cross, we see that God treats our sheer guilt with great seriousness, but also with shocking grace. And so as we walk away from this conversation, as all three men die, hopefully we see things afresh. As we recognise our sheer guilt, as we see God's shocking grace on offer to us, as we put our lives in his hands, as our only God and King, may our lives be transformed.